Hey everybody, welcome to The Sweet I Am. I'm Dr. Veronica Tedderton.
And I'm Dr. Carla Evans, and we're two psychologists who value family and chasing a deeper relationship with God. In this show, it's your therapy.
That's right, because every week we're going to give you practical strategies to help you heal and grow and to live life free and full. That is, free of heartache and full of purpose and passion.
Yeah, so welcome and thank you for joining the sweetest show around.
That's
Because
right.
it don't get any sweeter. And speaking of living life full, you've probably noticed I'm getting fuller by the moment. So not only are we hoping to share some encouragement with you, but we're just also doing life.
Yes.
We are talking about real talk, and we're talking about just things that go on every single day. So today we're so happy that you've decided to join the Sweet I Am, because we're going to be redefining happiness.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we want you to know that you have a choice.
You have a choice.
And so often in society, you have a definition or a definer of what society views as happiness. And we find ourselves always falling short, being able to measure up to what real happiness will feel like. And so we want to just talk with you about that today and just have some candor and share some real talk about life situations that kind of get you stuck and get you in a place where happiness seems like such a far-fetched idea or goal.
Yeah. I mean, that is the problem oftentimes, is our definition of happiness. And sometimes, Carla, we get caught up on really kind of confusing two things: pleasure and happiness.
Yeah.
Pleasure is what you gain a sense of happiness or something, pleasure that's gained from an external force. It's from something that you do. So I gain pleasure all the time when I eat a cake. Nothing but cakes all day. I love that. I gain pleasure from that. And sometimes that sense of pleasure will bring about a sense of happiness. But we know that those types of pleasures, they're really short-lived. And that is not really going to create a solid foundation of happiness. So it has to be something more.
Yeah, happiness is more than just a feeling.
Right.
Happiness is a state of being. It's a place of, it's a life decision. So with nothing but cake, it's like, all right. I mean,
You just
my
look.
feeling is
Did you see
like,
my face? Like the minute you just said it, my face was like, I mean, like, it's just something when you put those words together, nothing but cake. Man, it just messes me up.
Oh, yeah. Well, so as we can see, happiness is a feeling. That's how we identify it. But it's so much more.
It's deeper than that.
Than just a feeling. So we want to redefine it in a way that can be sustaining for you, because those holes that we fill, those gaps, we often go searching for that sense of happiness. And I once, not too long ago, was listening to a lady who was sharing that she was running to church and she was going to all the worship services and she was reading all the good books. But it was just giving her a quick feeling of happiness, and then she would go right back into those feelings of emptiness again. And so we want to talk with you today about knowing that not every moment of your life is going to be pleasurable.
Right.
But you can still be in a state of happiness.
And that's how a lot of people find themselves in addictions, because they're constantly looking for a sense of pleasure. They've identified happiness with pleasure. And so they're constantly trying to fulfill that sense of pleasure through either a drug addiction or a sex addiction or whatever the case may be. That pleasure is short-lived. And oftentimes when it's being fulfilled with something like that, a drug or substance or sex, for example, it's followed by more emotions of shame and guilt and other things that immediately take away from that sense of pleasure that you did get in the moment.
And even money, you know, we say money makes the world go round, and yes, we would all be so much happier, emotionally happy, if we had an unlimited supply of cash on us. But once those things are gone, once you come off that high, once you get out of that negative relationship, once you go off that kind of unwise shopping spree.
Yes.
Once you do these things,
and you
then
gotta
it's
pay
gone.
the bills.
I mean, you can see this on any of your television shows today, that people are searching for something. I saw a lady on a talk show not too long ago, and she said, my closets filled with clothes with tags still on it, because it gave me a sense of high or a sense of pleasure that I could go out and buy whatever I wanted. But once I brought it home, the happiness was over.
Right.
So we're trying to find ways to fill this void when, just like you mentioned, you oftentimes feel, you feel worse.
You feel worse
after the fact.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I recently watched something. It was really, just the other day I was watching something where this woman who was obese was really seeking happiness from eating the filling from her bedding and her pillowcase and her pillows and things like that. So the inner parts of and the foam in the mattress.
Wow.
She would literally go to her bed and tear off a piece of foam and begin to just eat. And what I saw when I watched that was a person who was just so unhappy within themselves and with such a void that she desired to fulfill, that she was filling it with something that had absolutely no value, no sustenance, no anything. It was just fluff. And that's what we end up doing when we find ourselves really seeking happiness and not really knowing how to get it legitimately. We fill our lives with a bunch of fluff.
So let's just define happiness for those of you who are listening here on The Sweet I Am, and feel free to jump in and give your opinion of happiness too. So we're not looking up Webster, but what is happiness for you?
For me, happiness is not necessarily tied to circumstance, but really to my perspective about it.
Yeah.
Good. Like that, that's happiness to me. Like I can be happy and broke.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? As long as my mind is right, if that makes sense. So, or I can be happy and in pain as long as my mind is right. And so happiness really is a state of mind for me. And it has a lot to do with contentment too. Like, was it Paul that talks about contentment in the Bible, knowing
in the state that I'm in, regardless of what that may look like,
whether have or not have, just a sense of contentment. And that for me is happiness, is contentment in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great perspective, that it is a choice and it is our perspective. And we've all heard the stories about people who say, well, what are we getting ourselves into? And they hear a negative perspective. Well, that's what it's going to be.
Absolutely.
And then before you know it, you've already created this negative agenda or negative idea of what's happening around you. And then you go to someone else and they say, it was a great experience, and that can kind of transform you.
Right.
So the way you look at situations, your perspective, how you react to certain circumstances in your life can identify what true happiness really is.
What is happiness to you? Like for you, personally?
So I think an example for me is happiness for me is a way of living. It's not a feeling. It's not a tangible, something tangibly given to me is creating happiness. It's a lifestyle. Because I'm choosing to be happy, I'm choosing to positively impact others around me, then that happiness is given back to me. So I oftentimes think of happiness as something as simple as being grateful. When I'm grateful to those that are around me, I'm not receiving anything from them, so to speak. It maybe at different times in my life I'm receiving things from them, but I'm giving a sense of gratitude or a sense of appreciation or a sense of gratefulness. But that creates that sense of happiness. And to me, that kind of happiness is not filled with an empty void. It's filled with, this is fulfillment.
Right.
And this is my life. Another example of how I would describe happiness is I'm going into labor with my children.
Yeah.
You may think, this is not a happy time. Let me just tell you, this is like painful, and this is heartache, and this is difficult, and this is challenging. But there's happiness in knowing what the outcome is going to look like.
Absolutely.
So sometimes it's being able to see what's beyond, the current situation. Like, this stinks. I mean, I think you think about it in the gym. It's the saying we've heard all of our lives: no pain, no gain.
No pain,
well,
no gain.
sometimes happiness is created out of the pain that we've experienced.
You're absolutely right. And if you are watching this on the playback and you have a definition of happiness, we would love to hear what happiness means to you, because it does have different meanings for everybody. There's a board, a psychiatrist who had this saying. She said this. She said, happiness comes from not from within, which is the common saying that we've heard, right? Happiness comes from within.
Yeah.
She said happiness actually comes from with.
Yeah.
And what she's doing, she's basing that on really some research that shows a really important key to happiness. So we're getting ready to shift now for you and begin to go into some of the keys for happiness. If you are seeking happiness, we're going to identify some ways for you to be able to achieve that, even though circumstances in your life don't necessarily have to change. And one of those things is our social connectedness to other people. So it's not from within. Our happiness really comes from our connectedness, our quality relationships with others, and having those quality relationships is a major component to our happiness.
And I think the key is the depth of those relationships. So
yes,
we can,
not these superficial
right,
relationships.
We can say we have X amount of likes on Instagram or X amount of friends on Facebook, but the depth of those relationships, we all know that when you have two friends who are investing in your life and who care about you and who go the extra mile and who hold you accountable and who recognize some of the real core issues of your life, those are way more valuable than having 245 people say, good job. I like that image you just shouted out or that you shared on social media.
And we are two psychologists chasing intimacy with God. So when we talk about social connectedness, we're also talking about, this is a great place too, where we're talking about our intimacy and the depth of our relationship with God. When you're developing a very intimate relationship with God and you're really getting to know Him and you've come into this place of communion with Him where it's not just a God that parts water. He's not just a God that parts waters, but He's a God who you intimately relate to, that you talk to in your comings and in your goings and in your dreams. You waking up in the middle of the night in conversations and that the depth of that relationship also can contribute to your happiness as well.
Yeah. And in addition to what you're saying there, it's so often we're trying to fill those God-given holes in our life with so many other tangible things that never do it for us.
Right.
They leave us feeling empty.
Right.
All of the clients that we've worked with, they say, well, I ran to this addiction or I ran to this behavior, like you mentioned earlier. And that hole that we thought this was going to do it, within a matter of days or weeks or months, they found themselves feeling much worse than they did when they started, because it wasn't intended to be filled by something of a tangible vanity.
Right. And so I love what you're saying, because really what you're suggesting is that God has created within us voids that only He can fill. And when we're trying to fill those voids with other things, then we begin to experience addiction, begin to experience guilt, begin to experience some of the ripple effects of some of our poor choices. And only God will fill it.
Yeah.
And so just having that mindset of really knowing that the social connectedness, not only with other people, having valued relationships, quality relationships with other people, but deepening your relationship with God also is so important and towards your happiness.
Yeah. And so that was what I was going to wrap up as well. Just doing an evaluation.
Do an evaluation.
A self-assessment, and say to yourself, okay, no, what's happening in the relationships that are around me? What's my relationship and the intimacy with God looking like? And how can I reevaluate some of those things and go deeper? And make a stronger connection with those people.
Right. And so if you are not happy, one way that you can do your self-assessment is to take a look at your social connections. Take a look at your relationships. Are your social relationships draining? Are they unfulfilling? Or do they give you life and give you breath? Because that's what our social connections, our really strong connections, they give us life. They give us enthusiasm.
Life is not a pleasure, okay? So it's not, look at all of the things we've done and look at all the great pictures we've taken so that we can share with the world that we've traveled the globe and that we've gone above and beyond to show that our relationship's amazing.
Right.
Sometimes it's those deep, intimate conversations with a dear friend, or it's that quiet time with God where you're connecting with Him that will really give you that sense of fulfillment and happiness in your life.
Absolutely.
The second way is the way that we perceive stress.
Yes.
See, so often many times we see stress as a negative. It's like, oh my goodness, life has thrown me a curveball. How am I going to manage this? How am I going to cope with the stressors of life? But when we look at it from a new perspective, what begins to happen?
It changes everything.
Yeah.
New lens, new perspective, and a new outlook, which creates a sense of happiness. One of the things that we know through some of the research in psychology is that stress, not all stress is bad stress. As a matter of fact, a certain level of stress will lead to peak performance. Like you will peak with a certain level of stress, and that's a moderate level of stress. Anything too much, and then it begins to be a little overwhelming. And so we need to understand that sometimes stressful situations are not bad.
Yeah.
And if we kind of begin to shift our perspective and some of the challenges that we encounter in our life, then we will begin to have we'll take a little bit back of our happiness, because we won't give away our happiness to the challenges that we're experiencing in our life.
Yeah, and you shared a video with me just the other day about how we define a situation versus how our children define it. So possibly the kids are spilling the milk across the floor or making a mess, or you drop the pie that you were cooking on the ground, and you're thinking, what a disastrous day.
Yes.
And then the child, she pipes in, and you had shared that video with me. What did the child say?
Well, the child shared, at the end of the day, the experience that they shared with their mother. And of course, the mother, just as you described, thought the day was a complete chaos.
Yeah.
She saw challenges, but what her daughter saw were beautiful moments that she shared with her as they sat on the floor, for example, and ate pie off the floor. Or they threw food at each other when things fell out of the grocery bag. And so rather than viewing them as challenges all the time, sometimes we need to kind of shift our perspective and view them as opportunities and moments.
Yeah.
And with that, it creates happiness.
Yeah, it creates memories, it creates happiness, it creates an ability to say, wow, I really saw something that was so negative, but the innocence of a child was able to use their creativity, think outside the box,
right,
and see something really beautiful out of what could have been a really awful situation.
Right. Like, so when your 2-year-old is screaming down the aisles of your grocery store and you're feeling like, what, this is a challenge. This is not a memory or a moment. This is a challenge. But it is an opportunity, though, for you to grow out of, and for you to be able to see that you can make it through this situation. And not only that, but it's an opportunity to do something uncommon. Like, I love the fact that in that video that you just referenced, the mother, in her frustration, just sunk to the floor where the cake or the pie was, and just slid down the refrigerator and just sunk to the floor in sheer desperation from the day.
Start the day over.
And instead of just weeping, she picked up a little piece of that pie and began to smear it in the face of her daughter. And from there, they had it was no longer a challenge. It was again a moment.
And actually, it turned into a beautiful memory.
Absolutely.
And something the daughter's probably going to remember about an instance that happened with her mom.
Absolutely.
Sharing that moment. So
challenges.
Just slowing down and saying, this feels very stressful, but let me redefine this experience.
Absolutely.
Let me redefine what's happening here for me.
True. So true. And it's a major point to our happiness.
Yes.
So we want to encourage you also to find meaning. One of the things that for people who do have a great deal of happiness, they have been able to find meaning in their lives.
Yeah, so what is meaning? Meaning is making that connection, right? The connection between what I'm doing, what I'm living for, my
and
behavior,
what you value,
and what's important to me.
Right.
Yeah.
So it has to match up. So, for example, if you value children, but if you value spending time with your children, but you haven't been able to for the past 2 months because of a major project on your job, then you're not going to be happy. So there has to be a sense of connection between what your value set is. For example, I'll tell you this, like this week I've been feeling real happy. You want to know why? Because I've been able to exercise the way that I want to be able to. And that value of taking care of my body doesn't always map up and align with my activities, but when it does, I always feel better about myself.
Yeah, and
I always feel better.
And so I would say if you're finding yourself feeling empty, then you might want to reevaluate your values, and then you might want to find out how much time am I really spending, because the truth of the matter is, if you're saying your values are this and you're not implementing them in your life at any point in your life, then they're quickly going to shift from being your values and they're just going to start being aspirations.
Yeah.
So reevaluate, what your values are and then how you're spending your time.
That's a really good point. So think about that when you're wanting to aspire for this happiness that we're talking about. The other thing that we wanted to share with you is optimism.
Yeah.
It's the word that people kind of get confused.
They do.
About the meaning of it. But really has to do with kind of believing in that things will eventually matter, that your behaviors or your choices will matter, that positive outcomes can potentially come. People who are not able to have a optimistic perspective, it's that glass half empty, half full. Like, how do you view life? Do you view life through the lens of a person who sees things as half empty? If that's your modus operandum, if that's how you operate, then you're going to tend to be on the less happier side.
Yeah. And an example of that is when people define happiness as a feeling, then they're going to oftentimes fall short, because a feeling of happiness can change in an instance. A feeling of happiness can change in a matter of one phone call.
True.
A feeling of happiness can change in the instant of one life circumstance. Someone picks up the phone and said there's been a loss. Someone picks up the phone and says you're going to have to be let go from your job.
Or you just happen to be watching TV and it's a particular scene that somehow triggers something for you, a memory, and then boom.
Yeah, it can destroy your entire day. So
Absolutely.
I think it's being very careful that when we think about optimism, it's not just being, hey, I'm a positive Patty and nothing ever goes wrong or nothing ever crosses my path, but it's being able to look at it from a new lens and from a new perspective. Because what you and I both know and what we teach our clients is this: there's not a single person in the world that can make you happy.
That's right.
There's nobody that can make you happy except for your Heavenly Father. He's the only person that can bring that true joy. But people, we want it from people. We want, I'm expecting you to say something or do something or for this relationship or something to matter so that I can feel happy. But the onus is on us.
Absolutely.
If our behavior and our mindset is not in the right place, it doesn't matter what people do. It doesn't matter the great relationships we have. It doesn't matter all of the skills, talents, and abilities that are at our forefront. We're not going to be happy.
Well, and the thing is it doesn't even matter what situations happen to you, because I've seen things, people have pretty good life circumstances. And they're still miserable.
Yeah.
And so it's not dependent on whether or not you get a raise and your kids are acting like angels and your husband is lovingly fixing dinner for you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, based on those factors. It is, as you said before, it's a choice. And so you choose daily what your experience is going to be. You happen to choose whether or not you're going to be happy. You choose whether or not you will be sad. Yeah. You choose whether or not you'll maintain resentments, bitterness, unhappiness. You make a choice. And I think the power, because I'm always focused on, I'm looking for my power to shift things. That's just how I am naturally. The power in that is that you have control over your experience. And so oftentimes we give external factors our control.
Yeah.
We give whether or not we're going to make our mortgage
good.
payment the control. We give whether or not our husband's going to say, I love you today, our control. We give whether or not our children are going to be obedient and make the right choices.
Operate properly and do
operate
all the right things.
Yeah, and clean their plates out, scrape their plates out, and do all of those things. We give all of those external factors control.
Yeah.
And it's about really taking back that power and that control and making the choice. Like every day, and not even just every day, every moment of every day is your choice.
Yeah.
How do you want to live it?
Yeah. Yep. Very true. So I don't know where you're stuck at today, but I would say even if you think you're doing all the right things, because we can be doing all the right things and still not have true happiness. You can be around the right people. You can be surrounded with the right support systems. You can be reading all the right self-help books, all the encouragement and inspiration, and all the great things that are being filtered into yourself. But if you don't have the right attitude, you're going to constantly find yourself falling short. And all that it's going to do is give you a quick hooray moment that you've just entered a stadium and a game was won, and that feeling is quickly going to pass you. So cultivate your sense of happiness today. Redefine it in a way that can shape you in a positive direction, and recognize that your choice to be happy, it's infectious. Your choice to be happy, it's going to impact those that are around you. I've tried this before. I've done this social theory. And I've said, can my feeling of happiness, not just my feeling of happiness, but my way of living life, impact someone in a positive direction? And if that person's willing and if they're seeking it out, they absolutely can receive that same sense of happiness.
Yeah.
And what does John 10:10 say?
John 10:10 says
Says
that the enemy comes that he might kill, steal, and destroy. But I come, Jesus, that is, that you might have life and have it more abundantly.
And that's what he wants. At the end of the day, we can look at this from every single angle, and we can give you some positive tips to help change the way that you look at life. But that's the goal. He wants to destroy you, and he's out to do whatever he can to make you feel hopeless and empty. He'll put comparison in your life. He'll put judgment in your path. He'll put shame across your face, and he'll remind you that you don't deserve to have true happiness. But God has chosen, and he said in his word that I've come to give you life, and I want to give it to you more abundantly. So we hope you can walk away from here with not just a feeling of happiness. And don't get it mistaken, because if Veronica has a plate of bundt cake in front of her face, what's she going to do?
You see that smile?
She's going to be happy.
Oh yeah, all day long.
And I can tell you all day long, if you put me in front of some chips and salsa, I'm going to be happy, okay? I'm going to be real happy. But know that those feelings will fade, and it's true happiness that we want you to have today. So that's why we talked about this topic, because I know both for you and I, we've experienced moments in our life where we thought happiness was created out of a sense of tangibleness. But happiness is not that place.
Yeah.
It's looking at life from a new perspective and being able to cultivate your behaviors and your relationships with God and with others so that you can have genuine, true happiness in your life.
That's it. So we hope that you've been blessed by the topic today, redefining happiness. You will not want to miss next Thursday's show, because we're going to be talking about the F word.
Yeah. Ooh.
Forgiveness. Yeah. We're going to be talking about forgiveness and really letting go of bitterness.
Yeah.
Ladies, there's so many of us that are bound up with bitterness for things that have happened to us, legitimate things.
Yeah. Things that you should.
Pain.
Things that you think, I can be resentful about
I
this.
should be.
Yeah.
This is
yeah, but it gets you stuck. And I'm going to tell you just real talk. We are the ones who suffer when we choose to not forgive. So you don't want to miss it. Next Thursday, 9 p.m. at the Sweet I Am. Thanks for being a part of our show. We hope you have a great evening, and we'll see you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.